It was the winter of 1959 in the Soviet Union, a time when the country was cold in more ways than one. The political atmosphere was tense, the mountains were frozen, and the wind cut like knives through the Ural peaks. In the city of Sverdlovsk, 9 young hikers were packing for what they thought would be the adventure of a lifetime. None of them could have known that this journey would end in one of history's strangest unsolved mysteries. The group was led by Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student known for his discipline and determination. His friends trusted him completely. He had organized many hiking trips before, and his meticulous planning left nothing to chance. The team included 7 men and 2 women, all experienced outdoorsmen and women, all fit and confident. They had hiked in worse conditions, they had climbed higher mountains, and they had faced the biting cold before. The goal was to reach a mountain named Oteton, a remote and snowy peak in the northern Urals. The journey was going to be challenging. Temperatures could drop below -30 degrees Celsius, and the trail was long and unforgiving. But for them, that was the appeal. They wanted the test of endurance, the thrill of pushing limits. They packed skis, heavy winter clothing, food supplies, camping gear, and even a camera to document the adventure. On January 27, 1959, they set out. Spirits were high, and the photographs later recovered from their cameras show smiles, laughter, and camaraderie. They posed with skis, sat around small campfires, and even made jokes in their journals. These moments would become haunting in hindsight, the last recorded joy before tragedy. The group trekked through dense forests, over icy rivers, and into higher altitudes where the trees began to thin. On January 31, they reached the edge of a highland area and prepared for the final stretch to Oteton. The weather worsened, heavy snow began to fall, and winds picked up, making every step harder. They decided to make camp on the slope of another mountain, Kolotsiakachel, which the local Mansi people ominously called the Mountain of the Dead. Why they stopped there, instead of moving a bit further into the forest for shelter, remains a mystery. Some think they wanted to practice camping on exposed terrain for experience. Others believe they were simply too tired to continue. That night, they pitched their large tent on the barren, snowy slope. The wind howled outside, but inside they were warm in their sleeping bags, possibly cooking dinner and talking about the journey ahead. What happened next is still a mystery. Days later, when they did not arrive at the destination, a search party was sent out. On February 26, rescuers found their abandoned campsite. The scene was terrifying and made no sense. The large tent was still standing, but it had been slashed open from the inside, as if someone had tried to escape in a hurry. Footprints in the snow showed that the group had left the tent barefoot or wearing only socks, despite the freezing temperatures. The prints led downhill towards the forest but then disappeared. About 500 meters away, the first 2 bodies were found near the remains of a small fire. They were barefoot, wearing only light clothing, and had burns on their hands. 3 more bodies were found between the forest and the camp, as if they had been trying to return. The remaining 4 hikers were discovered much later, buried under deep snow in a ravine. They had severe injuries, fractured skulls, broken ribs, and one was missing her tongue. Yet strangely, there were no signs of an external attack. Their clothes showed traces of radiation. The official Soviet investigation concluded that the hikers died due to a compelling natural force, but gave no clear explanation. Theories ranged from avalanche to secret military tests, from UFO encounters to supernatural forces connected to the Mountain of the Dead. To this day, no one knows for sure what happened on that icy slope. But the photographs, the journals, and the eerie details of the campsite remain, like frozen echoes of a final night filled with fear and confusion. And so begins our journey into one of the coldest and most puzzling mysteries in human history, the Dyatlov Pass Incident. When search teams first stumbled upon the Dyatlov campsite, they were baffled. The snow-covered slope was silent except for the wind, and the tent stood alone like a ghostly monument to something terrible. Investigators approached cautiously, their boots crunching in the icy powder. The tent's fabric flapped in the cold wind, the cuts clearly visible, not along the seams or zippers, but long slashes, as if made in desperation. Even stranger, the cuts came from the inside out. Inside the tent, the hikers' belongings were still neatly arranged, boots lined up, jackets folded, backpacks in place. The stove was disassembled, and food supplies were untouched. This suggested that whatever happened had occurred suddenly, forcing the hikers to flee without even putting on warm clothing. The rescuers felt an immediate unease. The footprints leading away from the tent told an even stranger story. They were scattered and uneven, showing some were walking, others running, but all were heading in the same direction, downhill towards a distant tree line. Most prints were made by people wearing only socks, and some appeared barefoot. The idea of leaving a tent without shoes in -25 degrees Celsius weather was madness. Unless they had no choice. The first two bodies were found beneath a large cedar tree at the edge of the forest. They were lying side by side, wearing only underwear and light shirts. Their hands were burned, as though they had tried to grab burning wood, perhaps in a frantic attempt to keep warm. Above them, branches were broken several meters high, suggesting someone had climbed the tree, maybe to look for the tent, maybe to escape something, or perhaps to gather wood. The ground around the fire was trampled, showing they had tried to survive for hours before succumbing to the cold. About 300 meters away, 3 more bodies were discovered, partially buried in snow. These were Dyatlov himself, Zina Kolmogorova, and Rustam Slobodin. They were positioned as if they had been crawling or stumbling back toward the tent. Dyatlov's hands were frozen in front of him, as if shielding his face. Zina's expression was locked in determination, her eyes open, as if she had fought until her final breath. Rustam had a fractured skull, though not severe enough to cause immediate death. He had likely died of hypothermia. Weeks later, when the snow melted further, the final 4 hikers were found in a ravine deeper into the forest. Their bodies told an even more disturbing story. Lyudmila Dubinina had multiple rib fractures, a collapsed chest, and was missing her tongue. Nikolai Thibault-Brignol's had a massive skull fracture, and Semyon Zolotaryov's ribs were crushed. Yet none of them had external wounds. It was as though their injuries had been caused by an enormous, invisible force. Even stranger, their clothing contained traces of radiation. Investigators could not explain where it came from. This detail was quietly buried in official reports, but it would later fuel endless conspiracy theories. The Mansi people, native to the region, were questioned. They told investigators that Kholat Syakachel, the mountain where the hikers camped, was cursed. The name meant, Mountain of the Dead, in their language, and they warned that strange things happened there. They spoke of glowing lights in the sky, strange winds, and whispers in the snow. Some investigators suggested an avalanche, but the slope was too shallow, and the tent was still upright. Others whispered about secret Soviet military experiments, perhaps a missile test gone wrong. A few even entertained the idea of alien involvement, pointing to the reports of orange spheres in the sky seen by witnesses in nearby villages around the same time. The official conclusion was vague. The hikers had died from a compelling natural force. But what force could drive 9 experienced mountaineers to slash their tent open from within, run half-naked into a deadly blizzard, and suffer injuries like those from a car crash, without leaving any signs of struggle? Over the years, researchers, journalists, and mystery hunters would pore over the evidence again and again. Some would point to infrasound, low-frequency vibrations caused by wind patterns, which can induce panic and hallucinations. Others would revisit the radiation clue, tying it to Cold War weapons testing. But none of these theories explain every detail, and none bring us closer to understanding the hikers' final moments. In the decades since, the Dyatlov Pass incident has taken on a life of its own. The mountain has become a place of dark tourism, with adventurers hiking the same path, standing where the tent once stood, and wondering what could have happened on that frozen night. But the snow keeps its secrets well, and every gust of wind over Kolet-Syakachel seems to whisper the same question: what terrified them so much that they ran into certain death? The mystery was far from over, and in Part 3, we will look at the theories, the overlooked details, and the chilling witness reports that might hold the key to the truth. The years after the Dyatlov Pass tragedy did nothing to quiet the questions. In fact, they only made the mystery grow darker. People wanted answers, but what they got were whispers, speculation, and hints of cover-ups. Official reports sat buried in Soviet archives, with key pages missing, photographs mysteriously lost, and statements altered. Those who had taken part in the search often claimed that they were told to forget what they had seen. But memories are stubborn, and over time, bits and pieces of the truth began to leak out. Witnesses in nearby settlements reported strange lights in the sky during the same nights the hikers went missing, orange orbs moving silently, sometimes slowly, sometimes with sudden bursts of speed. Some even claimed they were not just lights, but glowing spheres with shapes inside them. Military officers later dismissed these sightings as rocket tests, but that explanation only raised more questions, because no official record of such tests existed for those days in February 1959. Others began to focus on the injuries. The fractures found on some of the hikers were compared to those seen in car crash victims, massive internal damage without corresponding external wounds. The Soviet pathologists who examined the bodies noted this in their reports, but offered no explanation. How could such force be applied without leaving bruises, cuts, or broken skin? Was it a shockwave, a pressure blast, something unknown? And then there was Lyudmila Dubinina's missing tongue and parts of her mouth tissue. Early on, authorities suggested animals had eaten them after death, but some searchers said the wounds looked too clean, almost surgical. If scavenging animals had been the cause, why were her lips intact and her face otherwise untouched? Radiation was the next thread in the puzzle. Traces were found on the clothing of some victims, especially those from the final 4 bodies in the ravine. Investigators tried to explain it by saying some of the hikers had previously worked in areas with radioactive materials, but that seemed oddly convenient. And radiation does not just wash off in snow. If it was still present weeks later, it must have been significant. Conspiracy theories bloomed in the vacuum of certainty. One theory claimed the hikers had stumbled upon a secret Soviet military operation, perhaps testing parachute mines, which are silent bombs that detonate above ground. These could cause shockwave injuries similar to those seen on the bodies, and the bright flashes could explain the lights in the sky. If true, the hikers may have been in the wrong place at the wrong time, and the survivors may have fled in panic, only to die in the freezing night. Others thought of the Mansi legends. The local people had long warned about Kolet-Syakachel, calling it the Mountain of the Dead, after a group of 9 hunters had died there in the past. In their folklore, strange spirits guarded the mountain, and anyone who dared disturb them would face an invisible punishment. Could fear and superstition have played a role, causing panic that spiraled into tragedy? Or was there something more literal to those legends? Some modern researchers have explored the idea of infrasound, low-frequency vibrations created when wind passes over the mountain's unique shape. Infrasound can cause dizziness, disorientation, a feeling of dread, and even hallucinations. Imagine 9 people suddenly gripped by irrational terror in the middle of the night. They slash their tent open, convinced they must escape, and rush into the dark, freezing wilderness. But even this theory cannot explain the severe injuries or the radiation. And then there is the alien hypothesis, often dismissed by skeptics but strangely persistent among some researchers. The combination of lights in the sky, radiation, sudden panic, and massive but invisible force has led some to wonder if an unknown aerial phenomenon was involved. Could the hikers have encountered something unexplainable, and been silenced by it? Adding to the suspicion, Some photographs recovered from the hikers' cameras show mysterious lights and shapes in the sky. One final frame, taken by one of the group just before the tragedy, appears to show bright orbs in a dark sky. Was it the last thing they ever saw? Families of the victims never accepted the vague official explanation, and even decades later, survivors' relatives continue to push for new investigations. In 2019, Russian authorities reopened the case, but in 2020 they concluded, once again, that an avalanche was to blame. Yet, avalanche experts say the slope's angle, snow conditions, and the tent's intact position all make that theory unlikely. The case remains officially closed, but in reality, it is more open than ever, because the truth lies somewhere between the physical evidence and the unanswered questions. Even now, hikers who visit the Dyatlov Pass report an eerie stillness, as if the mountain itself is holding its breath. The snow crunches too loudly, the wind feels colder than it should, and at night, strange lights are still said to drift above the ridges. What happened on that night in 1959 may never be fully understood. But as long as the world loves a mystery, the Dyatlov Pass incident will live on, its unanswered questions echoing across time, daring us to uncover the truth that the frozen mountain refuses to share. As the years passed, the Dyatlov Pass tragedy moved from fresh news to a chilling legend, whispered in hushed tones by mountaineers and spoken of cautiously by locals. Yet, the deeper people dug, the stranger the story became. Among the most haunting details were the missing diaries of the hikers. Several notebooks were recovered, their pages filled with happy, routine entries about meals, jokes, and minor injuries, but the last entries seemed to shift in tone. The humor disappeared. There were hints of unease. One note mentioned strange noises at night, like distant metallic bangs echoing across the snowy slopes. Another entry briefly described bright moving stars that seemed far too low in the sky. These fragments ended abruptly, leaving no clue about what came next. Even more curious were the unspoken tensions within the search teams themselves. Some rescuers later admitted that their orders had been very specific: recover the bodies quickly, photograph only certain things, and do not discuss anything unusual. One rescuer claimed he was told to sign a paper swearing he would never speak of classified details he had witnessed during the search. This has led many to believe the government was hiding more than just an embarrassing oversight in rescue operations. Rumors began to swirl about strange military experiments in the area, not just parachute mines, but possibly early radar or even microwave weapon testing. These could theoretically cause disorientation, internal injuries, and radiation exposure. If the hikers had wandered into a test zone, the results could have been catastrophic. But such weapons were supposed to be top secret and under strict control, so why would they be tested in a region where civilians might travel? Meanwhile, Mansi elders told visiting journalists stories passed down through generations. They spoke of fire orbs that appeared above the mountains in winter, accompanied by a deep hum that made the ground vibrate. They claimed these lights were omens, warnings from the spirits, and that ignoring them would bring misfortune. Skeptics dismissed these tales as folklore, but even some scientists began to wonder if the locals were describing real atmospheric phenomena that modern science had yet to fully understand. What was harder to dismiss were the strange photographs. Several rolls of film from the hikers' cameras were developed, showing cheerful scenes of the group skiing, laughing, and posing in the snow. But mixed among them were unsettling images, blurry streaks of light, glowing dots, and one frame where an intense light source illuminates the snow as if a massive flashlight from above had shone down on them. The photograph is grainy, the shapes indistinct, but it remains one of the most debated pieces of evidence in the entire case. And then there was the issue of the hikers' clothing. When rescuers found them, some of the group were barefoot or wearing only socks, despite being outside in sub-zero temperatures. It's possible they ran from the tent in panic, not taking time to dress, but why didn't they return to the tent once the danger passed? Hypothermia can cause confusion and even a phenomenon known as paradoxical undressing, where victims remove their clothing because they feel suddenly hot. But this does not explain the deliberate slashing of the tent from the inside or the separation of the group into smaller clusters, as if they were running from multiple threats at once. The injuries of the last 4 hikers found in the ravine continued to puzzle investigators. Their bodies were buried under several feet of snow, suggesting they had fallen into the ravine or been swept there by force. Yet, the damage to their chests and skulls was so severe that some experts said it resembled the aftermath of an explosion. No burns, no shrapnel, just immense, crushing pressure. The idea of a snow slab avalanche was later proposed as a possible explanation, especially by modern researchers. This theory suggests that a small, dense block of snow might have slid onto their tent, forcing them to flee, and that later, as they sought shelter in the ravine, they were injured by another snow collapse. But even supporters of this theory admit it does not explain the lights in the sky, the radiation, or the missing body parts. In 2013, an investigative journalist named Anatoly Kuntsevich tried to gather all known documents about the case. He discovered that several official files were missing, including early witness statements. Some surviving documents had been altered, with entire paragraphs blacked out. His attempts to speak with surviving relatives met mixed reactions. Some welcomed his interest, but others begged him to leave the story alone, warning that it was dangerous to keep asking questions. One chilling account came from a man who claimed to have been stationed at a remote military outpost near the pass in 1959. He said that on the night of the incident, he saw bright, silent lights move across the sky, stop, and then hover over the mountain for several minutes before disappearing. The next day, he and his unit were ordered to stay inside their barracks and not go near the pass. A few weeks later, they heard rumors that hikers had died, but were told it was none of their concern. Could this have been unrelated, just a coincidence? Or was it the missing piece of the puzzle? As the mystery deepened, modern theories began to take shape. Some researchers pointed to katabatic winds, sudden, violent blasts of air that can roar down mountainsides at hurricane force. These winds could cause panic, disorientation, and hypothermia in minutes. But again, the physical injuries still resisted explanation. Others have turned to the possibility of a yeti or some unknown predator, though there is no physical evidence of animal attacks on the bodies. And yet, the sheer fear that would drive 9 experienced hikers to run half-dressed into the freezing night suggests something immediate, terrifying, and not easily explained by natural causes alone. The Dyatlov Pass incident remains an enigma, a puzzle with too many missing pieces and too many possible solutions. Whether it was a secret weapon, an encounter with something extraterrestrial, or simply a chain of tragic natural events, the truth is locked in a frozen grave on that lonely slope. And every year, new hikers, journalists, and investigators return to the pass, seeking answers, only to find that the mountain still keeps its secret. In the years after the Dyatlov Pass tragedy, the mountain earned a darker name among the Mansi people. Kolotsiakachel, the mountain of the dead, became more than just a legend, it became a warning. Modern hikers who dared to follow the group's path often reported a strange unease, as if the air itself was heavier. Some spoke of sudden headaches, nausea, or the unsettling feeling of being watched. As more and more theories surfaced, a group of independent researchers decided to launch one final, comprehensive investigation, determined to close the case once and for all. This was not an official mission, no government permission, no state funding. The team included forensic experts, meteorologists, survival instructors, and even a retired military officer who had quietly collected evidence for decades. The goal was simple: return to Dyatlov Pass at the exact same time of year, under the same conditions, and reconstruct every step of the doomed expedition. They began their journey in late January, the same day the Dyatlov group had left Sverdlovsk in 1959. At first, everything seemed ordinary: the deep snow, the biting wind, the vast white silence of the Ural wilderness. But as they climbed higher, they encountered the first anomaly: faint metallic clicking noises echoing through the night, like something mechanical turning slowly far away. Their recording devices picked up the sound, but when they tried to trace its source, it seemed to move, as if circling them. 2 days later, the weather turned violent. Visibility dropped to almost nothing, the wind screaming through the tent fabric like a living thing. That night, their thermal cameras recorded something extraordinary: several large, heat-emitting shapes moving across a ridge about 300 meters from camp. They were too big to be human, and their movements were too smooth to be explained by falling snow or wind-blown debris. The shapes vanished within minutes, leaving only the howling wind. On the 4th day, one of the team members found something in the snow, a scrap of old, weathered fabric frozen solid. Laboratory tests later revealed it was made of the same rare tent material used in the 1950s Soviet military. It was almost certainly a fragment from Dyalov's own tent, lying there for more than 60 years. This discovery reignited the team's determination, but it also heightened their sense of unease. That night, they heard a deep, low hum that seemed to rise from the ground itself. It lasted for nearly a full minute before fading, leaving the snow eerily still. Their instruments recorded slight spikes in radiation during the noise, though nothing dangerously high. By the 5th day, they reached the site where the Dyatlov group's tent had been found. The wind was ferocious, stinging their skin through layers of clothing. They set up camp exactly where the original tent had stood, slicing the snow into a flat platform just as the hikers had done. That evening, they recreated the final hours of the expedition, keeping journals and camera logs, speaking into recorders about each detail. It was a methodical, scientific process, until just past midnight. Without warning, one side of the tent bulged inward, as if something massive had leaned against it. No footsteps, no noise, just pressure. Then came a blinding flash outside, bright enough to burn after images into their vision. Half blinded and in shock, they scrambled out of the tent into the freezing dark. And there, above the ridge, hung 3 glowing orbs of light. They were silent, hovering motionless for a few seconds before shooting away into the night with impossible speed. The team returned to the tent in stunned silence, every theory they had brought with them now collapsing under the weight of what they had just witnessed. The retired military officer finally spoke. This is what they saw. Over the next 2 days, the team hurried their research, taking radiation readings, photographing the site, and mapping every anomaly. They found more strange depressions in the snow shaped like perfect circles, as if something hot had briefly melted into it before vanishing. Their compass needles occasionally spun in circles, and one GPS device completely failed, showing coordinates far outside their actual location. On the final day, as they prepared to leave, one researcher discovered an odd rock formation in the ravine where the last 4 Dyatlov bodies had been found. Hidden beneath snow and ice was a piece of twisted metal, small enough to fit in a hand, its surface scorched and pitted as though exposed to extreme heat. No one could identify its origin. It was not a piece of climbing equipment, nor did it match any known Soviet military hardware. It was taken for analysis, but when the team returned to the city, that single piece of evidence disappeared from their locked storage case. The security cameras showed nothing. Only an empty box remained. In the end, their findings were a mix of the explainable and the impossible. Weather patterns, wind dynamics, and snow behavior could account for some elements, but not all. The lights, the radiation spikes, the unidentifiable metal, these remained beyond explanation. And so the Dyatlov Pass incident closed its circle, the truth as elusive as ever. Perhaps it was a secret military test gone wrong. Perhaps it was an encounter with something far beyond human understanding. Or perhaps the mountain simply claimed 9 souls that night, and in doing so, etched their fate into a mystery that would never die. As the team left, they looked back at the ridge. The wind screamed once more, and for just a moment, they swore they saw faint figures in the snow, 9 of them, standing still, watching in silence. Whether ghosts, memories, or tricks of the mind, they knew one thing: Dyatlov Pass would never give up its secret. And maybe, in some dark way, that was the point.